Hi, welcome back to Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Judy Nathans.
And I'm Robert Winters. And it's
Back
still
again.
July 6th,
It is, and I
2021.
haven't seen the rain or thunder yet. Maybe it'll pass through, but it's supposed to be till 5:45, but we've passed that. Who
I
knows?
believe we've
Whatever.
already surpassed the
Yeah,
average
okay.
for the
But
month of July.
it's kind of dark out there. I don't know where you are.
Yeah, it's a little bit
dark where I am.
scary. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
also a witch flying in the sky saying "Surrender, Dorothy." But
Oh my gosh.
I didn't want to mention that, but it's true.
I wish there was, because then there'd be something else to kind of get us.
That would be a
away
horse
from-
of a different color, wouldn't
Yeah.
it? So anyway, we talked a lot about the local elections and the
Yeah.
emerging candidates and
Yeah.
perhaps candidates to come. But meanwhile, down south of us, 200 some odd
The Big
miles
Apple.
away,
In the
in
Big
the Big
Apple.
Apple, that's right. The New York City, actually, is it just New York City that adopted ranked choice voting? I don't think it was the rest of New York State.
Oh, no, it's just New York. Oh,
New York
that's
City.
a good question, but I think it's just New York City.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it was just New York City.
yeah.
And by the way, New York City used to have our system for their
Really?
school board elections
Oh,
from like 1970 some odd until maybe 10, 15 years ago. And then the state legislature got rid of it in the dead of night, kind of surreptitiously, just passed sort of like all those opposed, nay, kind of fast tracking. And they
wow.
just obliterated it in a heartbeat,
That's interesting.
Yeah, the school boards used to be proportional representation elections. It's true. But they hadn't had it for a while. But in the recent years, there's been a lot more attention
Mhm.
toward reforms such as ranked choice voting in Maine, in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
We had a ballot referendum, which unfortunately failed, which is,
strangely failed in Massachusetts, but
it's
we can live
unfortunate.
with that. But the people who are behind the campaign are still
Oh, sure.
continuing, and
Yeah.
so don't be surprised if that comes rolling around.
No, I
with the
get
next opportunity.
emails all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as more and more places use it, and if it's successful, hopefully it'll be successful, right?
Yeah.
Then the more and more people will go, well, yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, maybe we should go for that.
Yeah.
I
Especially when you
don't. I
have a
can't.
slew of candidates, it's crazy.
When you've got if your choice is between having a plurality election, winner take all election with like
Yeah.
7 candidates or
Yeah.
more,
Yeah.
and whoever does the best with maybe 30% of the votes somehow wins an election, even if 70% of the people voted elsewise.
Not for that candidate. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of, if anybody
good.
kind of thinks about it, that's not really the best system.
Not-
So,
But what about, you said the top 2 in New York? Isn't that what happened in Chicago too? There
No,
was a
no, so-
runoff between the top 2? No?
Right, so somebody like City of Boston has a top 2 runoff.
Yeah.
So basically, it's nonpartisan elections in Boston.
Yeah.
So you don't run as a Democrat or a Republican; you just run for mayor.
That
and
makes
then
sense. I think
Yeah,
that's
and
the way
then
it
the
should
top
be.
2 finishers. I mean, I'm okay with that system.
Yeah, it eliminates the prime, a lot of.
Yeah, and then the general election is just the top 2. I mean, the first one I was familiar with was Ray Flynn against Mel King. Way
Interesting.
back in
Yeah,
the
you're right.
early
Yeah.
80s, right? And but I think there may have been other candidates, but they were the primary
Yeah,
candidates. So
right.
it turned into a real debate
Yeah.
in a battle against 2 candidates who actually respected each other a lot. It was
That
actually
makes
pretty good.
sense. I wish we
Yeah.
did that. It would just make streamline things.
If you're going to do things like runoffs, I think that's actually a pretty good system.
Yeah.
And California has that. That's a big piece of how they do ranked choice voting in California. In New York City, that's not how they do it, because they still have partisan elections. I mean, I have a lot of issues with the way they conduct elections generally in New York, and the whole way you get to be on the various boards of election. Apparently, there's a lot of legacy politics to this. It's patronage positions. And now even the New York State Legislature is really talking about doing something about it because of the embarrassment that happened this past week. So let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, so they had I forget exactly what the total number of candidates, maybe about 10 candidates running for mayor in New York. And this was the first time they were doing it with ranked choice voting and transferable ballots for a single winner Single
you
winner election
could only
in
vote,
each party.
wait, for 5 or 9? It was, you couldn't do it the whole slate. You had to do the whole.
Yeah, I mean, in
5, I
our
think.
system, because it's paper ballots, you can
Yeah.
rank for up to 15. It used to be as many as you like, but it's 15 is what we
Because there's so many more have been running. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just a good system. And I did
Yeah.
the analysis to show that
It
even
didn't make any difference.
makes no difference
Right.
if you allow people up to 15 as opposed to up to as many candidates as are running. There's
Right.
no loss at all. There would have been no change at all in the results.
Right.
So we pretty much permanently, I think, adopted the 15 rankings, which is plenty. It's like you could have cut it much
Right.
smaller, it would still not have made any difference.
Right.
But in New York, it was limited to 5, and I believe that may well be because of ballot design or even
Right.
voting hardware limitations.
Yeah.
And that's often what the limitation. Like in California, it's vote for up to 3. Because I believe it's Sequoia voting machines. You can only put in 3 choices.
Wow.
You know,
So still, it's better than just one.
Right. So New York City voters, and these are primaries. These are party primaries.
Right.
So there was a Republican primary. There's a Democratic primary, and I think there might have been one other. But the Democratic Party is the one everybody was focusing on because that was the most likely winner. Because I think the Republican candidates were not exactly.
Wait, isn't it the Guardian Angels guy running as a Republican?
Curtis Sliwa, yeah, but he's not going to win in a general election.
But that's the only name I've heard. I don't know who else.
Yeah, well, there are others.
Okay.
But on the Democrats, it was sort of an interesting mix, shall we say?
Yeah.
I can even show the list. I mean, I'll do that in a second.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah, but the polling really changed. You know, originally it was Yang, who was a presidential candidate.
He seemed so popular.
And then he kind of knocked down, and then it was Eric Adams was ranking first, and then it was Garcia, Catherine Garcia, and Maya Wiley. Was she polling top? I'm not even sure.
She was polling on the top 3, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, but no, she was definitely in the top 3. So it was basically Adams, Eric Adams, Maya Wiley, and Catherine
Garcia, maybe. Yeah.
And then it was Andrew Yang.
Okay.
Right? And then there were a bunch of others, including some kind of interesting one like Paperboy Love.
Really?
What I forget now his last name. I'll pull it up here in a second.
I don't know that one.
But anyway, so they were doing it with transferable ballots and ranked choice voting, and so the election was on June 22nd. They were going to release the results, so I believe within a week of that. So when they released them, I have to confess, even though I'm sort of PR boy here, I didn't notice any anomaly because I wasn't really thinking. I did notice there was some things like, well, there's an awful lot of write-ins. And then I started looking at it and I said, why is it that when this candidate went out, like 80% of her ballots exhausted, whereas for other ones, it was more like 6%. I said, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
But then I saw immediately from the candidates there saying like, this is terrible. What kind of outrage is this?
Yeah.
And then the Board of Elections in New York came out and said, we made a mistake. And it didn't take too long for them to identify the mistake. But basically it was that there was 135 ballots in what we call a test deck that had been scanned as part of testing procedure prior to the election.
135 or 135,000?
135,000. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, we were laughing up at the election commission the other day. Like, normally when we do our test runs here, because we have to do test decks here too.
Yeah.
Human beings fill them out, and we try and fill them out. I've done it. I've participated sometimes.
Yeah.
And you fill them out as weirdly and as randomly as possible in order to try and break the machine.
I think you told me about this. Yeah, it's kind of funny.
Yeah. But I think in New York, they must have, for 135,000. No, they must have just printed out a bunch of identical ones. So there was a lot of repetition, I think, in their test decks. But what you're supposed to do, and what we always religiously do here in Cambridge at the beginning of the day, they open up the machines, they put in the memory cards, they zero out the machines, and they print out a tape that they tape to the wall physically. Wow. Indicating how that there 0 ballots are in the machine.
That's important.
And then when they close the machine, they print out a tape that says how many were there, and they compare it to the sign-in sheets. So
Sure.
they may not
It
be
matches
exactly,
up. Yeah, but
well, they
it
should
looks
match
good.
up more or less, unless somebody
Yeah.
forgot to sign out or something,
Sure.
or somebody miscounted, but it'd be approximately equal.
Mhm.
So we have built-in checks in Massachusetts, in Cambridge, and so Cambridge voters should understand what happened in New York can't happen here,
Right.
really.
Yeah.
But it could have, if we didn't have our procedures in place. And apparently in New York, they had new hardware, a new voting
Well, they hadn't
system,
done it before, right?
and
Yeah.
they didn't work out their protocols.
Yeah.
And maybe they took a little too casually. I can't say.
Yeah.
It could have been one individual who made a mistake, but they basically included 135,000 bogus ballots in there.
Yeah.
And they probably had the same candidate codes. That's why they counted towards some candidates.
How
and
did
not toward
they
others.
correct it? How did they know which ones were test and which ones?
Um,
They could figure that out.
yeah, I think if it was a
Oh.
test act, the thing is they
marked
probably have the
differently.
memory cards from the machines. It was probably
Okay.
in the tabulator. I don't know this,
Yeah.
but maybe the tabulator still had the data from the testing in there.
Okay.
I don't know that for a fact, but and then they just zeroed it out, and then they put in the actual ballot data. I don't believe they had to rescan all the ballots, but who
They
knows?
should. I think they should consult with you. I think you should go down there.
More than happy to, but there are plenty of other people who are pretty good
I
at
know
this.
that's true.
Yeah, and then they ran it, and then everything looked just fine and dandy. It's interesting in a lot of places, people care so much just about, well, who won.
Yeah.
But if you're part of the Cambridge tradition, that's just not how we do things here, right? So in
What are you
Cambridge,
sharing here? All right.
so I put together a spreadsheet of the mayoral results for the Democratic primary in New York. So you'll just see that, so for example, you can see Paperboy Love Prince, who's I think kind of a rap artist or something.
Okay. All right.
So there really was, you can count them, and there was like a dozen or more candidates plus write-ins and whatever. And just like we do with our counts, there was,
Sure.
they first knock off the write-ins and then they distribute. So Andrew Yang was the beneficiary, and Eric Adams were the chief beneficiaries of a lot of the write-ins when they were transferred. And then, then you sort of run through here, Wright goes here, Eric Adams tend to win. And, and if you know anything about the identities and the politics of some of them, some of these transfers make sense. Like, why does Eric Adams do much better than the other candidates on Isaac Wright? Probably racial identification, but I don't know that. And when one thing I got a kick out of was when you count out Paperboy Love Prince and Jocelyn Taylor, and they do it simultaneously in New York system. The chief beneficiary was the Bernie crowd candidate, Maya Wiley, just did phenomenally better off of the fringe candidate. I don't know what that says, but it tells it.
Well,
it gave me a little laugh.
She's definitely the progressive capital.
And Jocelyn Taylor's, I looked at that website earlier today, and she seemed to be espousing similar kind of kind of hard left-leaning thing. So now what's interesting is that in terms of what we would call the number one votes, Eric Adams finished first, Maya Wiley finished second, and Catherine Garcia was like 20 some odd thousand votes shy of Wiley. Then the system actually works in that, because there's so many candidates, including some who had a substantial number of votes, when you start counting them out and transferring the ballots, what happened is the gap between Maya and Wiley and Catherine Garcia starts to shrink. Eventually, it's still pretty. Actually, it took a while for it to change. Actually, it was right until the 2 rounds before the very end, where Wiley is still 23,000 votes ahead. But then when you counted out Andrew Yang,
because he came out to kind of endorse her even before.
So who does really well from Andrew Yang? Eric Adams.
Eric Adams.
And Catherine Garcia.
Yeah, makes sense.
And Wiley does a third as much, and then that put Garcia slightly ahead of Wiley. So the next person counted out was then Wiley. And then the final 2 candidates, when you counted them out, it was about a 2% gap between them. Now,
but there won't be a runoff between those two. Whoever is higher.
No, because whoever, there's no need to do a final count, because whoever was ahead had a majority, and that under the rules that they do, then that the
Yeah.
election is over, right? And then that person will go against a formal election against a
Yeah.
Republican nominee, et cetera. So that's how that one goes. This was all done. These are what we call preliminary results in New York City, because there are still some absentee ballots that have not been included.
125,000. That's a lot.
Right.
Mhm.
Now, of those 125,000, if they were distributed in more or less the same proportions as the original ballots were, then there shouldn't be much of a change. But if let's say Garcia ended up with considerably more, then that could close that 2% gap at the end. Or if Wiley ended up doing better than Garcia, then the final two might be Adams and Wiley rather than Adams and Garcia. So there could be some changes. And if the margins are sufficiently small, there could be demands for recounts.
Well, there's already going to be, I bet there will be. Although I guess they have to fall within a certain percentage point to have a recount.
You can
On a runoff, I don't know.
You can be, I don't know what the New York rules are. You can be assured that your recount will have to take place if it's within, typically the margin is 0.5%. But if you just sort of, you basically, you apply, you file signatures or whatever it takes there to ask for a recount, it does not have to be granted. So in other words, if Paperboy Love Prince says, I think it's a terrible mistake here, and I believe I must be the next mayor of New York, they will laugh him out of the room, and he has no right to demand.
But what if a candidate said, I'll pay for it?
I don't think that who pays for it is what does it, because it's, once the election has happened, it's not your ballots, it's not your election, it's the people's elections,
Yeah.
And it's the representative of the people who actually have to make those decisions, But what has happened, which I think is kind of interesting, is the fallout from this.
Yeah.
For those of us who have been advocates for ranked choice voting and proportional representation, this is not proportional representation.
Exactly, it's different. Yeah.
This is a single winner election that uses transferable ballots and ranked choice voting.
Right.
But for those of us who've been advocates, and by the way, I'm perfectly willing to entertain a conversation about the downside of any of these systems too. There is no perfect election system, but the nonsensical, intellectually dishonest crap that is being put out by people of sort of dissing that crazy ranked choice voting system. Here, see what happened in New York with what a travesty, whatever. The error that was made in New York City had zero to do with ranked choice voting. It had to do with the errors with election officials who counted the test deck and shouldn't have counted the test deck. You use a test deck for other election systems too, So but it's kind of been funny in its own way, but also ridiculous in its own way, But for those of us who kind of sit here up on the hill, the city on a hill, the champion of ranked choice voting, it's a kind of an interesting view from the outside watching it all take place down there. So anyway, it's not all elections.
What else
we do have our local city council did take care of some business over the recent days. Maybe we could just sort of rattle off a few particular things of significance.
Tree ordinance is definitely now in the books, right?
So that is ordained, and it was, we've had a tree ordinance, so this was.
I know, but this is the revised. Whatever.
So and it does make the fines more onerous, but it does allow some wiggle room for for resident owners. I'm not thrilled with the outcome, quite honestly. But because I think it's just one more step toward statism, basically. The government basically telling in pretty much dictating how you're supposed to be, and I'm not a fan of that.
You're going to take away your car, so
give them a chance. Give them some of them half a chance, and if the elections start continuing to trend, down that road, then you will be viewed as a pariah if you choose to drive.
Car storage.
Yeah, actually, there's a
Storing your
meeting
car.
coming up this week.
That's what I thought. I didn't
Traffic
know
and
it.
transportation.
Exactly.
Or
What is
next,
that about? Is it this? I don't know.
Yeah, it's coming up real soon. It's a
What
meeting
is it for?
It's on the 14th. It's transportation and public utilities to discuss car storage policies in Cambridge. In other words, you can't say parking because that would almost like acknowledge a normalcy to it.
Right.
So the chair of that
storage
particular committee will now, and Zondervan does it as well, Leo.
Yeah.
Will and maybe they're not the only ones. Will refer to parking as car storage because they're doing everything they possibly can to marginalize the whole concept. This little word game is not something I particularly appreciate. So anyway, so that's coming up. But other things that happened at our most recent meeting, they did ordain some zoning relative to cannabis delivery services.
That's right. Yeah.
This council and the previous one seem to have a very high priority in creating the landscape for cannabis, and that's all well and good. The people of the state voted for it, so that's okay.
Yeah, they voted for that, but they didn't vote for ranked choice voting. Give me a break.
I know it's kind of weird, right?
I didn't vote for it.
Yeah.
Oh, be quiet. But seriously, the thing on the cannabis, I know I'm showing my age. I don't get it. How are all these businesses going to function? Who's buying this stuff? It's not cheap, right?
No, I think we're not talking nickel bags here. We're talking primo stuff, right?
And what I've heard is it's still easier to just get it on whatever you call the black market or something.
Right. And enforcement is pretty much down to zero now on
holding a few ounces. So I just don't get all this, we're going to reap all these benefits from it.
Listen,
I don't know.
Listen, I was in Graffiti Alley and listened to a perfectly public conversation of somebody saying,
really?
Oh, you want to go buy that at the cannabis place? Oh, no, I can get it for you cheaper right here. It's just as good. It's better. So there's a bit of a cottage industry.
And I feel badly for there was a lot of public comment on that from the people, that are supporting this. But they have to pay rent, they have to pay employees, they have to pay maybe security. I don't know where they're making money. I'm just mystified by the whole thing.
Some of them actually have some capital from elsewhere that are helping float them.
But how many potentially? How many cannabis stores are we going to have?
Central Square. Well, we could have like 8 or 9, something like that.
Well, I know that legally we could have 8 or 9, but how many that
Central Square will have about 4.
What?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
4?
Yeah. Revolution.
Why?
The Sean Hope grouping. There's the Marvin Gilmore, the Dennis Benz. There's a lot of people in on it. Richard Harding. It seems like there's a lot of former and future elected officials seem to be in the cannabis business.
All right, Revolution. they do medical marijuana.
Yeah, the one right next to Graffiti Alley.
But they have the moratorium against them.
Well, see, now that's one.
That's the other thing that came up in the council, right?
It's actually quite interesting. Is that, and I don't criticize the desire to have people who might otherwise be shut out of an emergent industry to give them a leg up.
Because of the pandemic and everything, though.
Well, that's why they want to extend the moratorium or the preference period, I think they're calling it.
Yeah.
There does come a point where you're trying to game the system so much to hand the advantage that at some point it just starts to become a bit ridiculous. Basically, but the state law allowed for this, when they created the categories for social equity and economic empowerment, or whatever. And listen, if a local person can actually kind of make a go at it and get it to work, I'm all for it, especially if they can hire local folks to do it. Great, But
I just don't know who's supporting it.
But this is like a political battle goes on,
Yeah.
Remember the group that were putting around flyers called the Slave Amendment, trying to criticize
against Denise because
Denise Simmons had supported one particular point of view. I mean, this is brutal capitalism right now amongst people who are supposedly been shut out of capitalism, right? So I'm not happy about the way this is shaping up as a kind of a civic political nightmare.
I just wish it was for a better reason than marijuana. But
right now I just say just open them all up and and let them fight it out that way. And some
I'd like to
people
see
go
how
here,
many survive in a few
and then
years.
see how many
They're
survive.
open.
Maybe
Yeah.
they'll all survive. I don't really know.
I can't, I mean, where are people coming from to buy it here? I guess it's legal in
Yeah.
the state, right? But I
Yeah,
don't, but a lot of communities did something where you couldn't sell it.
they don't do the agreement, right? So
So they're all be coming from out of town in their cars probably,
yeah,
right?
maybe going home high. I don't know. Yeah. Now, another thing, just in the time we have left to mention, is that there was this big slug of $65 million from the federal government.
That's right, which had been
for-
charter righted this
Yeah,
council
sort of this
meeting
American
before.
Rescue Act or
Right.
relief funds, whatever.
Yeah, American
And
Rescue
it's
Act.
really there basically to address all of the debt and burden of actual COVID-related measures. But
Yeah.
as soon as the figure 65
I
million
know, everyone's
floated,
like, oh, free
oh,
cash. Yeah.
that's right. Elected officials start saying, "Oh boy, what can we do with this?" You know. And
And
so
people,
there is
yeah.
going to be a finance committee hearing later this month.
So
where
is
they
that
will
scheduled yet?
hash it out. Yes, it is
All right,
scheduled.
I'll look
I
on
think
the
for the
schedule. Yeah.
28th or thereabouts.
Okay.
You know, so they'll work something out about
Yeah.
it, but it was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of other things that, you know, they have now passed something to do a charter change, or at least to put something either
right.
on the ballot,
Oh,
if
they
it
have
flies, or a
it-
home rule petition with
Yeah.
three questions for charter change based on no public process at all. It actually
Right.
pisses me off the
Yeah.
degree to which this was just railroaded through by
Yeah.
certain councilors who basically just want to consolidate more power and authority to themselves. You know, the one having to do with city manager contract review make mandatory, nobody's going to object to that,
Right.
right? The one about charter review every 10 years,
That's reasonable because we haven't done
totally
it.
reasonable. I'd
Right.
vote for that.
Right.
But the one about basically giving city council authority to approve all
Boards and
boards
commissions and all that. That's
I
crazy.
mean,
Yeah.
in a city that prides itself on proportional representation,
Yeah.
you will have a situation, if this goes through, where 5 city councilors
Yeah.
can assure 100% representation on boards.
Like planning
agree
board
with that.
especially. Yeah. That's
And
crazy.
that's ludicrous.
I'm not sure they can get that all done by the state by the time for this election.
Well,
anyway.
we'll see. But
Okay.
you know, they call me non-democratic
I know.
because of this, but I don't
All
like
right,
it.
we got to say goodbye, and
All right.
we'll see you in the third Tuesday.
Yep. See you then.